Welcome to A State of Mind. This is Julian Royce. Today I'm speaking with Stephen Newman. Stephen is a visionary, a visual artist, creator of original music, as well as a DJ, and I'm going to talk more about him in a moment, but first I'm going to play for you guys a clip of a new song that he just put out called Hummingbird, so please enjoy. And I'm recording this intro on April 7th, a few days after I recorded this with Stephen. We will be uploading this to YouTube as well, so check out A State of Mind podcast on YouTube. And as you are, of course, aware, we are in the middle of the coronavirus pandemic, and things aren't looking good. I think we are all seeing an incredible incompetence from our leadership, and the failure of different systems that have been in place for a long time to really respond adequately to this crisis. I mean, I open up the news today and I read that our president, the clown-in-chief himself, this reality TV show we all seem to be living in, Donald Trump, has just fired the inspector general in charge of overseeing the $2 trillion coronavirus stimulus package. And I see that New York City saw its largest single day increase in deaths from the coronavirus. We have over 12,000 deaths now in America, 383,000 people with a positive diagnosis. Of course, these numbers are probably lower than the reality. And then finally, maybe the most bizarre one, the Supreme Court, in a vote along partisan lines. Remember, the Supreme Court is supposed to be a nonpartisan branch of the government that oversees the other two branches. The Supreme Court voted to bar the governor of Wisconsin from postponing the election. And so the election is happening today in Wisconsin, despite the coronavirus. And you have a situation where the Republican politicians are urging their people to go to the polls and vote, while the Democrats are urging caution and that no one should have to risk their lives to vote. This may seem like a federal interference in a state issue. Why can't the governor of the state decide when the election is going to take place? And it just shows how the Republican Party consistently plays these issues to their own benefit. On the one hand, they're a states' right party, except when it inconveniences them. Whew. Anyways, back to today's episode. This is a far-ranging and I think very interesting, very enjoyable conversation I had with Stephen. And we get deep into some stuff around politics and money and culture. Stephen really questions this idea of progress, which is like a fundamental underlying illusion, perhaps, but at least a driving force and ideal of our entire civilization. We get into some pretty heavy stuff like death and how our culture looks at and deals with death, as well as the bizarreness of people running out and buying toilet paper in response to the coronavirus. And along the lines of questioning this idea of our civilization making vast, unending progress, questioning this idea of exponential growth, Stephen made a point that really struck me, which is that there are only two things that grow at such an exponential rate. One is the human population, and the other is viruses. In fact, part of what defines a virus in the disease sense is something that grows exponentially until it eventually kills its host. So, some uplifting food for thought, no doubt. And at the end of this episode, there will be a recording of me and Stephen playing guitar together, just a one-time take improv jam. Hope you enjoy that. And without further ado, I bring you Stephen Newman.
It's been wild. It's like watching the world unravel at a pace that is unprecedented and strange and discomforting and also exciting and, interesting and
Yeah.
Equal parts like curious and fascinated by the developments of coronavirus and the pandemic, as well as like afraid and like anxious and all of the things that I think we're feeling collectively.
Yeah, we're all feeling things collectively. We're all obviously experiencing it individually, but I think we're affected by the way other people feel, and we feel the collective energy as well as our own energy. And I've noticed myself going through more ups and downs, more irritation, more anxiousness, more sadness, more anger, more times of slowing down, more times of thinking about death and history, and more time reading, more time on Facebook, which is probably not the best. But I've got a crazy story actually that I think is 100% related to the coronavirus pandemic, which is like, God, what was this? 2 days ago, Tuesday, I am driving home from the grocery store down a very narrow residential street, 25-mile-per-hour street limit. It's like one of these streets that has all these signs like kids at play, like 20 is plenty.
Yeah.
Slow your ass down. I don't know what they say. It's this old kind of wealthy residential neighborhood, and it's on the way to my house. And in the middle of the road is this man on a bicycle. And I slow down and I stop, and he's like looks kind of like he's directing me to turn right, or he's about to turn left, I think. And I'm coming towards him. And then he just doesn't move. And so then I slowly pull up next to him. He's like literally in the middle of the road, like right where I would normally be driving. Like I pull over to the side a little bit. I roll out my window to talk to him, and he just starts like cursing at me and yelling at me. And he's like, "Bikes have the right of way." And I was like totally calm and just, I was like, well, there's no stop sign here. There's no stoplight here. You don't have the right of way to turn left in front of oncoming traffic. And I wouldn't recommend that you do that. I slowed down to see what was going on, and he just and he was like, "Do you live here? I built these fucking houses." And there was like spit like flying out of his face. He was so angry.
God.
And then he like reached into his pocket, and I was like, wow, my life is actually in danger potentially.
Yeah.
And he didn't have anything, he didn't do anything like that. I was like, what if he had a gun? Like, and I stayed there with them and made eye contact for a while, and then I just like eventually just drove up, pulled my window up and drove on. And it was just amazing. Yeah.
People are on edge. I have a similar story. For me, like for the most part, I've just been at home, been creative, been kind of trying to do my own thing, kind of ground and hold space for myself and the collective, and definitely some ups and downs, but for the most part, actually, I've been kind of like just fascinated by all of it and trying to keep, some mindfulness around how my thoughts operate in this time and whatnot. But so on Tuesday, went on a walk with a friend, and she's like really cute, and so we're like walking on this sidewalk, and there's this heavy set man coming towards us, and I'm on the right side of the sidewalk, and there's a fence like right next to me, so there's no room for me to move, and Marley, who I'm with, is right next to me. And
like there's enough room on the sidewalk for the three of you to stand shoulder to shoulder, probably.
Not quite, but so it's me, her, and then there's like 5 feet of grass and then the road. And I've been like running around my neighborhood for the last few weeks, avoiding people, and everyone's been really mindful and sweet and kind. And this neighborhood's mostly like older people and families, And so this heavier dude like is walking towards us and like bumps into her.
Oh,
and,
no way.
And she kind of shrugged it off, thought it was like a joke, thought he was being like silly, and kind of like nervously laughed, and turns around and he's like, "What the fuck? Like coronavirus? Like what are you doing? Like you got to get out of the fucking way. Like what the fuck's wrong with you guys?"
He got angry at her.
He got livid and was just like, Marla's just like, "Whoa, like it's okay. Don't worry about it. Like let's just keep moving."
Like she tried to talk to him.
Kind of. I mean, she just was surprised. Like in the moment, it was like in shock that he was reacting this way. And then he made some vulgar comment about like, "Well, yeah, why don't you like jerk me off?" And Like,
oh man, people are losing it, man.
and I was like,
Some people.
dude, you need to calm down and continue walking, please. And he was like, oh yeah, you want me to like come over there and rip off your ponytail? And he was just kept
Damn.
escalating. And I was like, if you don't calm down, sir, I'm going to call the cops. And he was just like, and kind of just froze.
Oh, it's
and just
wild.
kept walking.
I had no idea you also had a story like that.
Dude, it's,
I mean, the thing that,
yeah, it's rough.
yeah. And I mean, people have mental health problems or whatever, but this person that I had the incident with on the bicycle looked pretty normal. And the thing that scared me is when I slowed down, I made eye contact with him and I tried to engage and talk to him and be calm. And he got more irritated and more, like, it's almost like he got more angry. But I could tell that my interpretation was he really wanted some connection. He wanted someone to see him, or he wanted to have power over the street or something.
Dude, that's exactly it. Like there's even before all of this, there's a crisis in people's loneliness and isolation.
No, absolutely.
Inability to connect in a deep way with each other.
Yeah.
Which is such a core thing that we need.
And now
it's become basically like mandated that we do that. And we're all like, okay, we were already struggling with that. Like, how are we going to navigate this? And so thankfully, like, I feel grateful that I've been able to, that I live in a community house and have good relationships and stay connected. And, it's still been stressful not being able to like go to the usual gatherings that I like to go to and that sort of thing. But yeah, I think for some people it just really gets to them. And it's sad. The main thing that came out of that experience for me, I was just like, I feel like these are the moments when having compassion and like consideration for others is of utmost importance, even though it's difficult, even though I kind of wanted to beat the shit out of that guy in that moment. And, like, obviously that would have been its own, reactionary thing of mine.
Yeah. No, it's good to name that. Like there's a choice point that if you can be aware of, you can make.
Yeah.
And, I mean, the thing that I thought about too, after this happened, like I'm driving back to my house and honestly, I felt like I had seen like part of my own mind, like just reflected back to me.
Yeah.
Because what that guy was like expressing outwardly was like exactly how I'd been feeling off and on a little bit in the last few days. Like I would be feeling really pissed off and angry and irritated and looking at things that are canceled and looking at my bank account and looking at the news and being annoyed at my housemates because we were all cooped up together and annoyed at my girlfriend because we're like spending all this time together all the time now. And so, I mean, I'm not outwardly acting that way, but I could see that, is a part of me too. Like I'm not really any better. And it made me want to slow down and be more compassionate, like in a deeper way.
Yeah.
And to really try to offer that. And I know that I haven't been doing that perfectly, but it gave me, that was kind of where I came out of it, like thinking about it, like, at least I'm glad I stopped and talked to him.
Right. I wish I had the opportunity to have it be more of a conversation with this gentleman, but he was just immediately like wanting to fight. And,
Jeez.
Like,
that's scary.
It is, yeah.
I've seen multiple people walking around my neighborhood carrying guns.
Yeah.
And that's just been interesting. Like I had a conversation with a guy with like a pistol around his holster on his hip and his like shirt tucked in, outside his store. And he was a super nice guy. But yeah, we're in a different era. We're in the coronavirus era. Things are different now than they were a week ago. They're very different than they were 3 weeks ago.
Yeah.
So, so it's interesting.
I agree. Yeah. I mean, it's shifted a lot. And one of the things that I really like resonated with that Sam Harris was saying on his podcast a few episodes ago was like, he was like, you're just living your life and it feels just very present, like being in your existence and experience, and certain events will just remind you that you're a part of history. And he was like, obviously for me, the first one like that was September 11th, 2001.
Right.
Just, you were like, this is unprecedented, out of the normal, like everyday sort of experience. And it's going to be remembered for a long time, as long as history is kept. And we're definitely experiencing that now. I mean, we talk about like other pandemics in history that have plagued humans, and this is by no means the first one, and by no means the worst one.
Probably not the last one,
and definitely not the last one. this is a feature of overpopulation rather than an
Yeah.
anomaly. But
this thing about like realizing that you're living in a moment in history that's going to be remembered has this like movie-like quality for me, because when you
Yeah.
watch a movie, it's often about moments like this. So
totally.
for sure, there's going to be something that people will never forget. And
it's the type of moments that breeds the most ridiculous conspiracies and,
right.
explanations without evidence that people can imagine. And,
And that's scary.
it's scary. And,
So,
what I really, what I was going to talk to you about before, but did you read Charles Eisenstein's article, The Coronation?
yeah.
It's been going
Yeah, I
around.
read at least a good chunk of it. I don't know if I read all of it. Yeah.
But one of the things that he mentions in there, I mean, the whole thing is really good, but and yeah, he mentions a lot, but he's like, to what degree are we going to let ourselves make the same mistakes as we did after September 11th in terms of like, are we supposed to just accept some of these, rights that have been taken away from us indefinitely? Are we supposed to, just believe all the ways in which this is being presented to us? And I think, there's a lot that we can learn from previous experiences, even though this is to some degree unprecedented. But I thought that was really interesting because we've all just kind of accepted, and I think for good reason, based on good advice from scientists,
Right.
the conditions that are required to overcome this as fast as possible with the least damage possible. However, there's a lot of question marks around like what's moving forward going to look like.
I think it deserves to be a question that we all talk about. And it's going to be really interesting to watch Brazil, the president, whatever leader, El Presidente of Brazil,
Bolsonaro
has mocked coronavirus and mocked the international response and is refusing to do the shutdown. And I guess there's some chance that he might make us all look really dumb. But, or maybe not.
You mean by it not happening to them?
Yeah.
I think there's a 0% chance of that. I think it's really unlikely.
Well, we're going to find out in the next few weeks. I just think it's interesting. I think you got to give them, I mean, there's some amount of chance, like, is a lockdown the best answer to dealing with this? Like Sweden is another country that hasn't imposed as much of a lockdown, but they, and unlike Brazil, have publicly talked about being willing to accept a large number of deaths. And it's a different culture there that is maybe more accepting of death. And maybe we are willing to do a shutdown and sacrifice a lot in order to prevent deaths. And maybe that's our value,
Yeah. But that's what a lot of public health officials are saying, is that we think of it as this trade-off between, the lives of however many thousands and the economy. And the reality is, if it were any more number of deaths, it would affect the economy. There's basically you have two shitty options.
Right.
Tank the economy worse. There's no like non-take the, unless we go back in time and prepare for this,
right,
and have adequate testing.
No, that's a good point.
All the equipment is in production already, and unless we see this coming, kind of like that Bill Gates TED Talk where he's like, if something kills 10 million people in the next decade, it's not going to be a war. It's not going to be...
It's an amazing TED Talk, yeah.
It's not going to be a natural disaster. It's going to be a virus.
And he gives excellent advice in his 8-minute-long speech.
Yeah.
He gives 3 simple steps to follow.
Yeah.
And we didn't do it.
Nope.
But he's like, here's 3 things that we should try.
We literally did the opposite.
Yeah, we did the opposite.
We got rid of the people who were put in charge of that.
He makes a great point at the end. He ties in dealing with the pandemic with our national defense. And he says, we spend this many billions, whatever it is, number of dollars on defense. We need to pair our defense system with our response to a pandemic.
Totally.
Merge our medical and our military so that they work together, because the most powerful force on the earth is really the Pentagon.
Right.
If you want to get down to brass tactics, like boots on the ground, people that can do something. Thank you. I was going to say something, but I forgot. I guess, the question that I was like raising around Sweden, around the way different countries could respond to this is more, it doesn't have to be an economic one. It could also be like
More
for example,
moral, philosophical.
Yeah. And it's tough. And like when you raise that in a public conversation, at least in my experience, people can get really outraged because it could sound like you are being disrespectful to life or diminishing people. But I don't know. I think that a lot of people, at least privately, are like asking themselves these questions. And
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's
yeah.
what's tricky is I've had a lot of these conversations, obviously, and everyone makes it really personal, like, and that's a good thing. Like, that's a good reason
It is
to,
personal.
yeah, like, be cautious about,
Right. Right. If your grandmother's life was online, if your daughter's life, if she's immune compromised, if you're, and everyone knows someone like that, or
Right.
most people.
Right. And so that's what I think hit it home for people. But I think you're right. I think that there's again, what I liked about the coronation is, like, Eisenstein really addresses how, okay, this is what's going on. This is the symptom of, the coronavirus experience, and then our reaction to it. And then let's look at what is being brought to the surface about our underlying psyches. And so he talks about the reflex of control. And he actually has a really great point that he makes, which I had never thought about, which is that we have so many problems in the world that we feel like we don't have control over. So climate change, poverty, hunger, natural disasters, all of these things that feel completely out of our control. And since they do, we, as like limited, finite beings, try to kind of ignore those issues and say, well, I don't have control over that, so I can't really do anything. We can't really do anything.
Whereas then, have a sense of powerlessness.
We have a sense of powerlessness. Whereas then something like a virus comes along, and then it's like, wash your hands, stay at home, do all the things that we pretend like is going to give us control over the situation, even though if you look at the numbers and all the things going on nowadays, like, it's out of control. But
nature is out of control.
Exactly. But we give ourselves the illusion of having control. And that's this underlying, like, impulse that we have. And it makes sense. I certainly experience it.
Yeah.
And then the second one that he brings up is the denial of death.
Right.
So we have this tendency to really ignore our mortality in especially instances like this.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And, the reality is we're all going to die eventually. This is an impermanent experience. Obviously, no one wants to or feels like they are. I would say most people don't feel like they're at peace with that reality. But something like this brings that to the surface, and it comes out in really interesting ways across different cultures and for ourselves. And
denial of death it's on a cultural level too. Like, we don't, especially in our culture, in our day and age, we don't see animals being slaughtered that we're going to eat. We don't see public executions the way that they used to have them. We don't see dead bodies. We go to the hospital.
Yeah.
So we don't spend the time around death that people in the past did.
Right.
It's interesting, like in the Buddhist tradition, you spend time like consciously thinking about death. It's like the classic Buddhist meditation on impermanence. And I don't know. I mean, I think it does change your mind. It changes who you are. I think it can change you as a person. But I think the denial of death is like something we learn also from our parents, like as children.
Totally.
It's something we learn in Disney movies. I think it goes very deep, and I think we all have it, basically. Yeah.
Right. Which is why something like this current event is bringing it to the surface.
Right.
It's very universal, and like, it's a struggle that doesn't exist only when there's a virus in our midst. It's there all the time. And, from all the mystical readings I've done and experiences that I've had, I think the best way to sit with that reality and that understanding is to see it as a teacher and to embrace it as a force that can motivate oneself to show up in the life that you have in the best way possible.
Yeah. That's a good outcome.
Right.
I think it can also, honestly, it's interesting to think about. If you for sure knew that you were going to die tomorrow or in 24 hours and 48 hours, like if you really believed that to be true, you probably would live a very different 24 or 48 hours, than. So it's not really the best life strategy to like live as if it's literally your last day, because you would be like kind of insane, and you'd probably wind up homeless, or you'd spend all your money, or, So, but it's like to live informed by that reality, but you don't know when it's going to happen.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a really good like mantra that I heard Pema Chodron say in one of her talks, which is um, since the fact that we will die is certain,
Yeah.
yet the time of death is uncertain. What's the most important thing?
Mm. Oh, nice.
And it's just like a mantra to remind oneself, especially when you're in like triggered states or in, sort of any kind of mindful or lack thereof episode. It's a really powerful mantra to kind of bring you into the present and be like, is watching this Netflix show right now the best use of my limited life force? Is And again, you're right, you don't want to live like that. It's hard to live like that consistently, and we obviously get distracted by a lot of different things and have a lot of ways that we try to avoid that reminder.
Yeah.
But I think it can be a really deep, profound catalyst
Absolutely.
to bring yourself into a deeper space in life.
Yeah. Well, I think that like Netflix example is an interesting one because if you can, like, so many millions of us are watching so much more Netflix right now, and that can be something that can be beautiful. Like if you do it consciously, if you like, you can learn a lot, especially around the way stories are structured, the way characters,
Totally.
I've been watching what is it, Tiger King? Just last night we watched that. It's
nice.
Fucking insane.
Yeah.
But anyway, I thought about something.
It's beautiful art. No, I don't mean to hate on Netflix. I watch my fair share of content like that. But there's a difference between consuming it in an active way and consciously, and like I don't like, for example, any like violent or like crime things or any of that. It just feels like noise to me. But yeah, something with a really beautiful artistic bent to it, I think is tremendously valuable and engaging. I mean, yeah.
I think a good question that I ask myself, and I'll encourage other people to ask, is like, am I using this to disconnect, to numb out, to disassociate? Versus an active engagement. And I mean, sometimes maybe that's an okay choice too, but it's good to like ask that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But I thought about something else because was it Charles Einstein? His first thing was around control. How we all want to have control. I've been thinking a lot about toilet paper and like why when we hear about the coronavirus coming, and it's not just Americans, it actually happened in Germany and it's been happening in Europe as well.
People need to get on that bidet game.
People stock up on toilet paper.
Everyone in India is like, what's toilet paper?
Yeah, it's not exactly something you need to literally survive, but I think it is a way to feel like you have control. And I think it's also, in a weird way, a denial of death, because toilet paper is like, it's very white, it's very perfect, and it's very disposable. But we don't think about all the waste. We don't think about how we're disposing all the time.
Yeah.
Like its cleanliness is like wrapped up in the fact that it's like, you just use it one time, right? I mean,
right.
That's what we want. We crave that kind of cleanliness.
Right. Which can be achieved in ways other than toilet paper, which is...
I would hope so.
Yeah, no, that's the thing. It's so cultural, and all it takes is a trip to most other places in the world, especially Asian countries, to realize like the things that we take for granted here, like toilet paper and, toilets with seats and that sort of thing, are not universal. And it's humbling to realize. And
yeah,
I mean,
it's like a symbol of our civilization too.
Yeah. Again, like psychologically, I mean, I know you're well aware of this as a therapist, like the most things that give us the most neuroses and strangeness psychologically tend to be the things that are most basic to us. So like food, sex, defecation, or, bowel movements, awkward body things. Those tend to give us the most sort of neurotic mental reactions in conversation and just in relationship. Yeah. So
that's interesting.
It's no surprise that like the run on toilet paper happened as soon as there was any concern about the availability of toilet paper.
It's no surprise.
And food.
It's just so funny. And there was this article in the paper the other day about this paper company in Maine that was like on the verge of going out of business, and they've converted to making toilet paper, and they have like, orders through the roof.
Genius.
Yeah. So, yeah. But like, I mean, the trees being cut down and whatever. I mean,
yeah. Sorry, I was realizing my light's reflecting in the computer.
Oh yeah.
and get the moon orb.
Well, one thing I wanted to talk about, and I kind of meant to do at the beginning, but here we are. We chose to come together tonight, and like when I got here, I washed my hands. Like we both spent time together about a week ago, like just before the shutdown order happened, and we talked about it. And so we're like, neither of us have symptoms. No one we live with has symptoms. We've both been basically quarantining, and I think it's important. Like we were talking about before we started recording, I feel like it's important to have a few close friends that you have that kind of relationship and communication and trust with. And if you know that they are safe and that they're respecting the quarantine and taking care of themselves and keeping their immune system up and, being responsible, that I think having a few people that you can hang out with is important.
Totally.
And I think we should follow this shutdown within reason, and that when we talk about mental health, human connection, seeing people talking is important. And one way you can do that is go outside. So I've been going on some walks with people. You can stay 6 feet apart, 5 feet apart, and go on a walk and talk.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I'm really grateful that we've been able to connect through all this. And I think that's exactly right. I think heeding all the advice of public health experts is of course necessary, and that there's certain ways of like continuing to relate to people in a safe way that I think are really important for one's health, just as much as washing one's hands. And I mean, back to those particularly aggressive fellas that we had stories about at the beginning of the show. I don't want to speculate. I don't know them, but I'd imagine they're probably lonely and struggling to overcome the feelings of isolation. And
interesting, they're both men.
Yeah, totally.
I think men tend to show more aggression like that outwardly.
Yeah. But yeah, I completely agree. And yeah, I'm taking all the precautions, like went to Costco and basically got enough food for 2 weeks and haven't gone to the grocery store in like almost 10 days. And I've been continuing to go into work, but I work with one other gentleman, and he's basically just lives with his wife and basically just goes between the warehouse and home. And so I mean, that's the main idea, right? Is like minimize the amount of interconnections that are happening. And that's where the exponential growth happens. It's like one person goes and hangs out with a group of people, they spread it all, and then it just kind of balloons. Yeah. And when we're all doing our part to keep safe and isolated to the extent we can, we're avoiding that exponential growth curve from happening in our communities. Yeah, just posted, I'll put it on this website for this podcast as well, but an article by a doctor or about a doctor giving advice. Like the number one thing is to wash your hands. Yeah. Like if you keep your hands clean, but the article goes into more detail about what we've learned about how this virus spreads. And basically if you are, like the number one way is hand to face contact after you've contacted the virus on its surface. Right. And just breathing the air if you're in a space with someone. But I found that would take about 30 minutes or more in a contained space where the other person is coughing and expressing symptoms of it. Right. And presumably if it's an enclosed space, those surfaces are also covered. Probably, so, like making sure that you wash your hands and whatnot. But it's totally, one of the things he said, it's totally possible to have someone in your house have the virus and to, be intelligent and act appropriately, and for other people in the same house to not get it. Right. So it doesn't mean that everyone in the house has to get it. If you keep 6 feet apart, if they are very careful about washing their hands, if they stay mostly in their room, things like that. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think for the most part, it's one of those weird things. Like, obviously, no one wants to catch a virus. Like, like that's what turns us all into these, into like hygienic freaks, which is again a good thing. But there's a little bit of overkill to it as well, and a little bit of wondering. Like, again, he talks about it in Civilized to Death, and Chris Ryan talks about it a lot. He's like, often we'll solve a problem and then we'll create 3 problems in that solution. Right. So washing your hands compulsively solves potentially the problem of transmitting viral diseases. Let's see, this is the book you're talking about? Yeah, Civilized to Death. Really good, recommend it. We do understand that there are benefits to the microbial world that we interact with as human beings on a regular basis. And, there's crises in certain medical centers with, for example, children that are born by a C-section. They don't get like the microbiome of their mother's vagina as they're being born.
Right.
And so they basically need to be exposed to microbes in the world to build their immune system. And it's this weird relationship that our immune system has with the environment, where we're only immune once we've been exposed to the things that could kill us.
Right.
It's the same with the coronavirus. Like, we'll achieve immunity eventually.
Yeah.
That's the theory, at least.
Yeah, we will. Nature's beautiful.
Yeah.
And honestly, our immunity grows stronger then. Obviously not for everyone.
Yeah.
But it raises so many interesting questions. Because when if we want to look at our society and our culture, how are we building resilient systems? Like, we should be expecting this.
Yeah.
Every 10 years. Like, how do we respond? How do we deal with it? If the quarantine idea is the best way to deal with it, how do we build an economic system that takes that into account and can even thrive or flourish when that condition arises, and then adjust and be strong and flexible, and not this giant pyramid of dominoes where the real estate market is overinflated and mortgage payments don't come in and people can't pay rent, and then, people stop going to restaurants, and like all these dominoes start falling and the whole thing just collapses, and the whole thing is built on a foundation of debt. How much debt do we have in this country? How many Americans have to make credit card payments every month? How many Americans lease their car, have mortgage payments on their house, have student loans? Like, we're massively in debt as a society. What happens when all these debt payments don't come in because people don't have money, because they don't have a job, because there's a quarantine?
Yeah, there was a lot there. I totally agree. The economic side of this was pretty profound, and kind of like amazing that the market didn't see this coming, because this is what's so ironic about this. Like, this fucked up the economy, no doubt about it.
Yeah.
But
it's like a nuclear bomb in the middle of our economy.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And in some ways worse than an actual nuclear bomb.
In some ways worse than an actual nuclear bomb. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, because it's global. But the problem is that we're based on market incentives. And so, for example, the United States has 2.8 hospital beds per 1,000 people, far lower than even Italy has, like 14 per 1,000 people.
I didn't know that.
Many socialized...
We're south in Italy.
Many socialized medicine countries have more. And the reason is because our health system is a for-profit system.
Right.
And so what they basically do is they calculate, like, what's the minimum number of hospital beds we can get away with having, not preparing for something like a pandemic, because that's not going to improve our bottom line. And lo and behold, a pandemic comes around and we're completely underprepared in our health system. And the reason is because we exist in a capitalist system, which says your bottom line, being in the black and being the biggest number possible, is the only thing that matters. And basically this experience, I know you shared that article of, reality is endorsing Bernie Sanders. It's
a great headline.
Is exactly true, because it's like, this is the exact occasion where a government is the only entity that's able to invest in things, collect wealth from the collective, and invest in things that don't produce any return. So, for example, that was the whole point of the New Deal, was let's just put people to work building national parks and building infrastructure and doing a bunch of projects that don't serve any sort of market purpose, but stimulate the economy in a way that that is beneficial longer term.
Right.
And the argument for moving towards more of a socialist system definitely comes out in an experience like this. We should collectively agree that we should prepare for these sorts of things to happen many more times, probably.
Right.
And if we can transition our economy to be more resilient, like you said, I love that analogy of the pyramid of dominoes, because that's exactly like
scary, though.
Exactly what it is. Well, it's scary, and what I've really been meditating on, and like, no doubt we're in the thick of it. No doubt it's going to be fucking hard for a long time as a result of this. But I find that there's actually tremendous opportunity to rewrite the economic story. I mean, overnight, we somehow convinced Republicans that they need to give a bunch of money to ordinary Americans. You can say there's a lot of like really twisted economic provisions in the stimulus packages, which there is.
Well, what
But
kind
like,
of provisions have you seen that are ridiculous?
Well, so I haven't done the full sort of analysis of the legislation, but so there's $500 billion, I believe, set aside in sort of unrestricted loans to corporations.
Jeez.
And it says 500 billion, but apparently it's more like 4.5 trillion because of certain of the time elements of it. I don't know exactly how it works, but over time it could equal up to 4.5 trillion. And they have the Democrats were able to get some provisions in to expand unemployment to be available for gig workers, people who
you were mentioning
are self-employed. Yeah, so people with like 1099 income or that report self-employment income as freelancers or photographers or any sort of gig work are eligible, which is great. And there's other things that are meant to help workers, but basically, again, I'm a little bit rusty on like the exact details, but basically some of the things that people are upset about in terms of how this legislation is skewed towards corporations and large financial institutions is banks like Goldman Sachs and other big banks can borrow money from the Federal Reserve at 0 interest and turn around and make a loan for 3% interest to normal people. And so basically they're making 3% interest just because of this discrepancy in interest rates between the Federal Reserve and them.
That's so fascinating.
Stuff like that's going on, and that people have been upset about in terms of how corporations are benefiting from this.
So what if you took the opposite side and like a positive reason for that? Because I could imagine that the people working at Goldman Sachs are very knowledgeable about the economy and might know where to send out loans to, thus get things going.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not saying I like what you're saying. I'm trying to think about it from...
No, you're absolutely right. That's the argument that is valid, is like, well, these businesses employ people and stimulate economic growth and innovation, and there's really good reasons not to let them fail or go into bankruptcy in this time, because that directly and indirectly affects much larger portions of the population economically. So no, you're totally right. And it's a difficult one to parse out, because it's kind of like, it would be nice if we kind of had some of these checks and balances in terms of like inequality and like corporate wealth versus like poverty across the country kind of in check to begin with, which we don't. Obviously, it's like the most unequal we've ever been in our country.
Yeah. The other side of this argument is like, these guys at Goldman Sachs and all these places are the architects of this world. And if this world is crashing and burning, why should they be the last ones to die and drown?
Right. Exactly.
I mean, are they really going to... It's like, is our system going to change itself? Or is some catastrophe going to have to happen, that, like a revolution, like a collapse that forces... If you look at history, there's usually some sort of really cataclysmic thing that forces real political change. Yeah. Like, we're living in a world where everyone knows that we're not sustainable. And like, this is something I've been thinking a lot about. And like I posted on your Facebook the other day. Mm-hmm. In the exact same way that Bill Gates and other scientists have been warning us about a pandemic coming from China that we're not prepared for like 10 years now. These same scientists are warning us about global warming. And we're not doing the things that they recommend about global warming. Yeah. And so we're driving like straight off a cliff. And like the coronavirus is like a drop in the bucket compared to global warming. Yeah. So I hope this is a wake-up call where we restructure our world in a more sustainable way. Yeah. I hope so too. But I don't know if it will be. I think it can be. I think there's been a lot of people posting, maps of pollution over the last 8 weeks. Right, it's going down. It's going down tremendously. Yeah. And like, what did it take? A fucking virus to come just eat our souls. Calm your asses down. Stop moving about. Yeah. And like, I think there's a lot of reassessment that's due. And what's just so tricky is there's so many people and so many different influences, and politics in particular is so bogged down by bureaucratic nonsense, and for good reasons. I mean, the system is set up in such a way that tyrants are thankfully not able to really do much. So for all the things that
someone like Donald Trump has been able to do. The United States government, as far as I understand it, is designed to be able to limit the ability of someone like that to do too much damage. But when we actually need to get shit done, like a New Deal or like a Green New Deal, we need someone like Franklin Roosevelt, who had the entire Congress on his side, who could just basically like get shit done.
It's all one party.
Social Security, created all the, like was able to basically be a benevolent dictator over the country and served 4 terms and like was one of the best leaders we've had and was really influenced by, like sort of Keynesian economics of balancing the budget and like running a deficit when you need to stimulate the economy and running a surplus when you have enough going and like riding the waves and basically really rational economic thinking.
What happened to that?
Yeah, it went out the window when we elected Ronald Reagan in 1980. And yeah, there's a lot of systemic things in our government in the United States, at least, that ideally would be different to be able to address problems like climate change.
A lot of bureaucracy, a lot of bogged down details.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, well, this is something else I've been thinking about. If we had done everything that we should have done about the coronavirus, nothing much would have happened, and the average person would have thought that we way overreacted. Like if you had shut down the country for a month ago when we should have done it, the average person would have been like, this is a government takeover, like it's time for me to get my guns, or it's time for me to, I don't know what would have happened. People would have freaked the fuck out. Like we couldn't do this until we had to, until we saw the evidence ourselves.
No, but this is where good leadership comes in. Because, for example, in South Korea, I don't know their political structure, and, I'm sure they have issues like any country, but they saw this coming right as it came out of the
gate. Yeah, they did a better job.
And they did a much better job. They ramped up testing really quickly. They were able to do contact tracing with people who had tested positive so that they could contact everyone who came into touch with them.
No, you're right.
And they basically nipped it in the bud like a responsible adult would do if they had a problem on their hands.
Right. Well, the thing about that is they can look out at the rest of the world and they can feel good about themselves.
Yeah.
But it's like the United States is such a big country that, a lot of people here, not everyone, so ignores the rest of the world.
Yeah.
That I feel like if it didn't come here, that the more conservative, more conspiracy-minded folks would have just had a heart attack.
Yeah.
And maybe they already are having a heart attack. I don't really know. But
again, this is where good leadership comes in, because a leader needs to be able to see something coming, make a decision, which might be unpopular. Like, who cares if I get reelected or not? We're trying to address a fucking problem right now.
Yeah.
I don't care about my reelection. I care about doing my job.
That would be amazing if someone actually said that.
Yeah. And that's what is sorely lacking in not just the United States, I think in a lot of places. And that's unfortunate that we have those perverse incentives for leaders.
This might be one of the real failures of our whole political system, that these politicians are concerned about getting reelected instead of about doing what is the right thing.
I know. Yeah.
It almost makes me think about like a one-term, like here's 5 years, you'll be judged for the rest of history based on what you do, and you can't get reelected.
Right.
Like maybe that would be a better system. I don't know.
I think there's arguments for both. I mean, after Roosevelt, they passed, I don't know what, like one of the 20s amendments to limit the terms to 2, clarify that. And I think there's good reason for term limits, and I think it lends itself to, over long stretches of time, it's probably not the right use of the word, but a bit of a bipolarity in our worlds and our approaches to things. And, swinging between Republican, Democrat, we're just what's the word? We're just swinging on a pendulum. And in the case of the most recent election, we kind of like threw the pendulum against the wall. But yeah, I agree. And that's what's tricky about continuing to be, mindful and motivated and engaged as a citizen and as a community member, as a family member in relationships, is like, while those sorts of systemic things are really annoying and really difficult because you can't really affect them, like how can I show up in my life to do my part to maybe like participate in a newer story that I want to be a part of rather
Yeah.
than
Yeah, newer
this
story.
old one. So
Maybe the story of our generation could be making the world like a sustainable place, a better place, a more equal place, like Martin Luther King, like that kind of vision for what we can do.
Yeah.
It's interesting when you talked about the pendulum swinging from left to right in this country, because I totally agree. But then when I think about Trump, it is like it got thrown against the wall, because I don't really think about him the way I thought about Republicans and conservatives before him. Like it's almost like they were getting so squeezed and marginalized in a lot of mainstream discussions and like universities, and kind of lost their mind. And like all of a sudden Trump came in and like became obviously the new leader, but like I wonder how much of what he's doing now, like conservatives, Republicans would have agreed with 10 years ago or 15 years ago.
Oh, I mean, he's making lots of people look really hypocritical and foolish. And
he's so good at doing that too.
Well, and it's like, I don't know how people can live with themselves, and I think it'll be I think it already is and will be an odd sort of blip in people's, I don't know, openly ignorant ways of being.
Yeah.
And that,
like you think that 10, 20 years from now, politicians that are still politicians, that are still alive, like this will be like the country will kind of return back to a kind of normalcy.
No, it's over.
I think it's over, man.
I think so too. Which is
what the Democratic Party needs to do is get on board with like things have changed. We don't need Biden. We need something different.
Exactly.
Trump's something different.
Right, and that's basically what it was. And the reality is that he was a symptom of a much deeper systemic issue, which can be boiled down to economic inequality. People over the last 40 years throughout the United States, the middle class has been gutted, and it's it's not like an accident. It's a very consciously crafted, designed thing that the elite of this country, and this is, I'm sounding like a conspiracy theorist, but it's very, very easy to see and well documented that there's been a systematic attempt to flow wealth from the lower half of society up to the most wealthy. And this has begun since Ronald Reagan. And there's a lot of different memes that have gone into this trend.
Yeah.
I'm getting a lot of this from a book that I recently read called Winners Take All, The Elite Charade of Changing the World. It's really good, by Anand Giridharadas, who's the editor-in-chief of Time magazine. But a really conscious narrative that says the government isn't as good as the private sector as solving problems.
Right. We get fed that story all the time.
So what it's turned into is the Bill Gates of the world are actually better at solving our problems than the government.
Right.
And that's not inherently true. That's not a fundamental truth about government. It's just a story that we've reinforced and retold ourselves over and over again. And what it's led to...
Great point.
Yeah, and what it's led to is basically a privileging of the wealthy class as necessary and important, and they basically get to write the legislation and rules to benefit themselves and screw over the impoverished people. And lo and behold, over 30, 40 years of this, everyone gets sick of it and votes Donald Trump into office. That's an abbreviated explanation, but that's basically the underlying issue that has resulted in the election of someone like Donald Trump.
Yeah, absolutely. It's ironic in some ways, but I think in other ways, because Trump was so loudly this billionaire, right, who was so open about how much money he had, people interpret that as a reason to think that you're a success, as a reason to think that you're smarter, as a reason to think that you're better. So I think there can be some truth to that, but it's this idea that we have, if you had an equal playing field, like the best people would kind of rise to the top. And so what people are thinking is like someone like Jeff Bezos, there's something special about him that made him uniquely successful. And then he gets to reap the rewards of his success. And like, if we can have people like that making these choices, that somehow we'll be better off than the government, because the government is kind of bogged down in bureaucracy and it's kind of stupid. And I don't know why people hate on the government so much. It's just easy to hate the government. The government's always the big bad guy. Like in all the Hollywood movies, the bad guys these days are always like CIA.
Yeah.
The CIA is always the bad guy now.
Yeah.
The CIA, in theory, used to be the good guys, right? When was the last time you saw a movie where the CIA did anything good?
I
If
mean,
we have that much distrust
yeah.
of our government, then yeah, we're giving all the power to the corporations.
Yeah.
I think you're absolutely right.
Yeah. Well, that's basically what's happened, and he does a really good job of breaking it down in Winners Take All. And what's the most fucked up part of it, or one of the most fucked up parts of it, is how that narrative gets reinforced, so that basically, like, even the wealthy class begins to, believe their own bullshit.
Oh, absolutely.
So
Yeah.
their whole, and again, someone like Bill Gates is a bit of an outlier, but there's examples of someone like Bill Gates putting his thumb on the scale of democracy in a way that's really concerning. And for example, in the state of Washington, there was legislation that he was advocating for to increase the number of charter schools in Washington, which on the surface is a good thing. Like, charter schools get to kind of be outside of the public school system and can make education more tailored towards like gifted students and whatnot, and are funded differently. But the research suggests that they actually privilege wealthier families, and
Oh, really?
they're actually like somewhat discriminatory. So, anyways, he was advocating for this legislation in the state of Washington, and the public was against it. They voted it down. So it was like 70 to 30. I don't know the exact numbers, but they voted it down. He brought it up again in local politics in Washington, and got it on the ballot again. They voted it down again, and he put in millions of dollars to get this particular piece of legislation passed. Yeah. Did it a third time, and it passed, because I don't know exactly. He was just basically bankrolling this one issue. Oh. And it's like, I don't feel comfortable living in a society where Mike Bloomberg can buy the presidency, or someone like Donald Trump can self-fund his campaign and can outspend every other political candidate because they're billionaires.
Well, it's interesting in the case of Trump that he hasn't done that, because he might not have as much money as he says he has.
Right. He's a fundraising machine just because of his, his charisma.
He will happily take all your money that you want to donate to him.
Totally.
But Bloomberg, that was interesting to watch that happen. The potential's there.
Well, but the fundamental is just what fucks with people, like, including me, and that's exactly what Sanders is all about. He's like, we are letting the wealthy class buy the democratic system that we all should be able to control more of.
Well, honestly, like, most of the people that you get to listen to are a part of that class.
Yeah.
Most of the entertainers, most of the athletes, most of the media, the main media, right? Yeah. That's part of the problem.
Yeah.
Like, if you have that level of success, then you are just invested in the system.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of how it works, and that's part of its appeal. Like, it's possible to catch this little wave and like ride up the spiral, and like you get a little bit of money and you invest in the stock market. Then you're invested in the stock market doing better. And then maybe the stock market does better, you get more money, you start doing this and that, and then you're like in part of the system and you're invested in it succeeding. And we pretty much all are to some degree. Like, even if you're a waitress at a restaurant, you want the economy to do well so you get more tips.
Right.
So it's all very connected.
Yeah. Well, yeah, this gets to more fundamentals, which I've been kind of wanting to do like a video series on, because I'm like a layperson's expert in economics. I don't feel like I am, but like, from studying business and just through my interests in reading nonfiction, I studied a little bit of finance in college. Like, just got really curious about the nature of economics and what it is, and kind of really breaking it down into some of the fundamentals, which I'd be interested to talk with you about and run some ideas by you in this. So, for example, the way I understand the economy is it's basically just a way to measure and analyze human behavior on an aggregate level. So what money is it's basically a tool for measuring individuals' contribution to that system. So I always use this example when I'm talking about this, and you've probably seen this, but if I have $1, I do. So you brought up the cycle of debt earlier, right?
Oh, yeah.
What does that say? Right there.
This note is legal tender for all debts, public and private. Oh, interesting.
Right.
Never noticed that before.
So
that's right on the dollar bill. It says that.
Every treasury note, as far as I know, has that statement.
So it represents debt.
Represents debt. So what does this represent when I have this?
I never thought about it that way.
This means that society owes me $1 worth of value.
Oh, yeah, interesting.
And what happens when I give this to you is you are presumably owing me something in exchange for that. So that's where the debt comes in. You're basically creating debt just by having money to begin with. It's part of the monetary system. So when the Federal Reserve makes $2 trillion in loans out of thin air,
Right.
it's basically adding $2 trillion of debt to the system. But it's like, who is that debt owed to? Who owes that dollar of debt to me? It's
That's
it's
interesting.
like us. It's the collective.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of this interesting thing that another really fascinating part of it that I heard explained is actually this was in the book *Sapiens* by
I love that book.
Yuval Noah Harari. Yeah. Basically, debt in terms of loans represents the difference between the actual value of the economy, like here, and what we anticipate the growth of the economy to be over time. So if we have, for example, I think the GDP of the globe right now is like $68 trillion. So that's the real value that's being created and exchanged in any given year across the globe. And then the global debt is something like 160 trillion. So that difference is what we believe the economy will grow into over time. And that's what
Interesting.
we create debt as a thing that like puts us on this trajectory over time to create and be productive and add to the system, and
Yes.
to engage with one another.
It's beautiful when you. I mean, I think it's the whole thing is built on faith, and I think that's
Absolutely.
beautiful. You know,
Like-
it's like we're the creator. Like something created us, and then we're creating. You know, everyone's a creator,
Yeah,
and this like paper becomes this symbol that takes on all this power that we've given it. I think it's incredible.
it has its own godlike quality. Exactly.
Absolutely.
Yeah, this is what, again, Charles Eisenstein talks about in his book *Sacred Economics*. He's like, this is a story. We've told ourselves a story. We
Right.
think that it's real, and it is because of how much we think it's real. It's kind of like the placebo effect, you know.
Right.
You're like, I'm gonna
No, it's so
get better because I'm gonna get
fascinating.
better.
I mean, it used to be connected with like a metal, like gold. Like there would be something a little bit more real, a
Yeah.
weight there that was, you know, limited to some degree. And the jump to this paper, to this symbol, now it's a number in a computer. It's amazing.
Yeah,
Like we've entered this I mean, maybe it was already there, but like we're existing in this symbolic realm in this really powerful way.
Yeah.
Um,
and
it's like
could,
you know, it's mathematics.
and it is, and it could be. It has its own kind of qualities and characteristics. Like I said, it's a tool for measurement. So, you know, your net worth, my net worth, Bill Gates' net worth. It's a way that we measure value, worth, but it's skewed in only one direction as far as like one's productivity or one's assets or one's investments. And a news story could be, for example, everyone has worth fundamentally, no exceptions. Every single human being.
Now, could that tie into the idea of universal and basic income? Is that
Absolutely.
the same kind of idea.
Yeah. Like everyone's entitled
Just
to
for being a human.
food, shelter, water,
Healthcare,
protection, healthcare.
education.
Yeah, and you know, that's utopian, no doubt, but there's, you know, to greater and lesser degrees examples of that in other places. And it doesn't have to take out the other thing that's really fascinating about economics that I think about a lot has to do with incentives. So the biggest problem in communist systems is you lose the incentive to achieve and
innovate and change and challenge authority and think for yourself and
exactly
all these qualities that are important.
Right. And so basically there's like, again, back to the pendulum or like the dial, there's got to be an opportunity to kind of balance those two things or those sides of like socialism versus capitalism to maintain incentives of, you know, pro-social, pro-cultural, pro-civilizational things.
Right.
But ensure that everyone is taken care of. So
I think that's the world we're moving towards. I really do. I think the coronavirus kind of proves that to me because we really do value life.
Yeah.
And I see that. And I think that's beautiful.
Yeah.
I think that.
Sorry, squeaks. Yeah, that was a rant.
Yeah. What was I going to say? I just think the coronavirus is like actually going to shift some of the things that you're thinking about. Like this idea of universal basic income after the government has given everyone so much money, like it's going to be like that will be online as a possibility because it's happening. Like this has never happened before.
Well, there's been other
Maybe there's been.
like it is somewhat comparable to the 2008 financial crisis. The rates are much larger. It's worse. But there's been economic downturns. There's been pandemics. These are all, from my perspective, both in terms of human civilization at the scale that we're at, and in terms of our economic capitalist system. These are features. These are not bugs. This is part of the deal, and that's what's upsetting.
Well, part of what you're saying is that we have to pay attention to what we incentivize. And I mean, the other part is that money is symbolic, and if we see the numbers on the stock market go down, it doesn't mean they can't go back up again. So we don't have to take it maybe as seriously.
Well, but for example, why does our economy have to grow exponentially?
Right. No, that's it.
That's one fundamental assumption that we just don't really challenge. And he addresses it in Sapiens. He's like, we need to believe that the future is going to be better than today for our system to work.
Right.
People you didn't used to think that way.
Right.
In the Middle Ages, people were like, I highly doubt that the future is going to be better than what it is today.
Right.
And this is another sort of thing that's woven in. He addresses it in Civilized to Death. He's like, we have a very fundamental story that we need to tell ourselves regarding progress.
Right.
Regarding like we need to make this thing better, as if there's something better to be made. And instead, I think what we've done is we've kind of continued to tell ourselves that story, and like every problem we solve, there's three more that are made, and that's what's kind of the tragedy or folly of our experiment as a civilization. Is like it'd be nice if some of these efforts that we label as progress, like exponential growth in our economy and vaccinations and all these technologies, which we should be thankful for in our own lives.
Yeah.
But like recognize that like there's unlikely to be a perfect state that we're going to get to with all of this.
No, that's a good point.
Nor would we want that. It'd get boring.
I think the exponential growth of the economy is really fascinating, and I've thought about that, and maybe we could create a sustainable world where we don't measure our success in that way, or our progress, or our well-being in terms of exponential growth. Or maybe that's like a feature somehow of how we are psychologically, economically, and we could have that if we completely divorce our economy from the consumption of the natural world.
Yeah.
Like in the world of tech, in the world of online, in the world of pure symbolism, it can grow exponentially, perhaps. As long as that doesn't mean that we're destroying the earth.
Yes, totally. And that's one of the tricky things that is systemic, which is, so there's been a lot of conversation like the Federal Reserve can't bring the interest rates below zero. You can't have a negative interest rate.
Right.
What would that look like? That would look like I have $1 million with $1 million loan and it has negative 10% interest. That means that next year I'm going to owe less no matter what. It's basically a decaying interest rate system, whereas what we have now is a appreciating, accumulating interest rate system. And what that does is it forces everyone to need to make a return on investment. So when a bank lends out money, it needs to earn a certain percent in return.
Or it's losing, like it's like treading water. You have to keep going. Right?
In finance, they call it the time value of money. So money in our system increases in value, or excuse me, money itself actually decreases in value over time. That dollar bill every second due to inflation is slowly its value is going down, which encourages me to spend it today. That's how we basically create our consumer economy. But and this gets into really nitty-gritty, but I find it all really fascinating and actually really comforting to kind of understand how this sort of stuff works. But we could create a currency that had a negative interest rate, which would mimic nature, because nature decays. Things boom, and then they die. We have this kind of abstraction of a system that produces exponential growth, which the only things that grow exponentially are human population and the viruses. Yeah. And so we should really look at that, and make a system that more mirrors nature.
I like that. I like that a lot. I've heard people talk about that before, but that was well said.
Yeah.
So there's no other systems in nature except for the virus that has this exponential growth.
Yeah. What's really fascinating looking at population growth curves in like wolves or other species or deer is they look logarithmic is the term. So they go up exponentially, but then they tail off. And the reason they tail off is because of certain environmental reasons, usually to do with food. So like as the rabbits population increases,
Right.
the wolves population increases, they eat the rabbits, and then their populations both level off or go down eventually.
Right.
What we've done as human beings, which is genius and also a big cause of civilization and all the crazy things that have resulted over the last 12,000 years, is we've figured out how to make our food production grow exponentially. And that has directly matched the growth of human population.
Yeah.
And we've basically told ourselves a story that we're the exception to that rule in when you talk about like environmental science and ecological systems.
Right. We
and
believe we're
it's
the exception.
right. And it's like you said before, it's kind of dark to say in terms of the death toll that's being taken in coronavirus. And this is, like I said, it's a difficult comparison to swallow, but we talk about thinning the herd all the time in terms of like deer populations, because it's actually unhealthy for the deer to populate a particular ecology too much. They'll cause more disease and all these things. And, you know, it's tragic, but that's what's happening to the human population right now through this virus.
Yeah, I think we are herd animals.
Yeah. Well, and that, you know, really comes out too, and back to the sort of unintended consequences of the solution that we've come up with as far as staying at home and social isolation. Is like we really need each other.
Yeah.
And care about each other and feel interwoven.
It actually lowers your immune system to be socially isolated for most people.
Yeah.
You know, something I've thought a lot about, like, something that proves how social we are is that solitary confinement is used as a punishment when you're already inside of a prison.
Yeah.
Like, you're already being punished by being held in a cage in prison.
Yeah.
But to make that punishment worse, we put people in solitary confinement. And it's really fascinating for me to think about that in, like, relationship to contemplative traditions where people would go off alone for years at a time meditating. So it's like that, this time of like being isolated physically doesn't mean that we can't be connected in many other ways.
Yeah.
Ways that are potentially more powerful and transformative. Like we can work with our own minds, basically.
Totally.
And I think through doing that, like we are already connected all the time. That's why we can feel the collective energy, the collective anxiety, the collective angst, you know. So it's, I think the one thing that this virus proves to everyone is how connected we all are. One person getting this virus in a stadium of 30,000 people, what kind of impact does that have?
Yeah.
I mean, it's just unbelievable.
Totally. And like that's, it produces, unfortunately, from what I've seen, it's kind of both polarities. It causes everyone to say close the borders, like everyone gets xenophobic about, you know, where this came from or whatever, versus what I take from it. And like you said, like this virus doesn't care. The hurricane doesn't care. The comet doesn't care which country you're from. You know, the rain falls on the rich as equally as it does on the poor. There's an equalizer to this that's actually really humbling and important to remember.
You know, the other thing that this virus doesn't care about is political correctness. Yeah. Like, I read this article the other day about how the DNA of people in Asia and China is different, you know, than Europeans. And so that's part of why the virus is impacting different people in different areas differently. And some of the information coming out of China in the beginning, that it didn't affect the young, may not be true in other parts of the world. But there was no discussion or outrage of that article being racist in the coronavirus era.
I know.
But I imagine that if it had been written a few months ago, it would have been. But I was like, this is like science. There's science, there's truth, and then there, you know, and like then there's our opinions about it. Yep. So take it or leave it. Like there.
Yeah. Well, what's tricky about some of this data is like population level. I believe they call it like, well, in this case, it's health data, but like epidemiological data across population is really suspect as things to draw conclusions from. So I'm sure you've heard of some of the controversy around the bell curve and the Charles Murray basically writing about population differences in IQ between African Americans or other races and
how controversial
white
that is.
people and Asians having a better IQ on average and stuff like that. And I think it's kind of both. It's like the statistical psychological evidence is obviously there, and we can analyze the biases inherent in intelligence tests and say,
Right, they're both
like,
true.
well, to take a really good example, a hunter-gatherer wouldn't be able to register an IQ higher than, I don't even know. Like they'd have a tremendous they wouldn't even be able to read the fucking
Right.
thing.
They could be a very
But,
intelligent.
Yeah, they were
person,
very
honestly.
intelligent people. They were very intelligent. In fact, in a crisis situation like this, their intelligence is probably actually a lot more useful than ours. And there's some really wild theories. This is like a rabbit hole if we want to get
Just
into
one
it.
thing I want to say real quick. Whenever the bell curve gets brought up, it's pointed out that whatever truths are discovered across a given population mean almost nothing about an individual.
Yeah.
And so there's a both and.
Yep, that's what I was kind of trying to say too.
Whether or not the differences are superficial or whether or not they have implications for something like the coronavirus or a genetic disorder, like there are DNA differences between different races to some degree, just based on the geographical separation that's occurred over a period of time.
Totally. Well, in my understanding of Charles Murray, I actually haven't read the bell curve, but just from listening to his interviews and whatnot, is that he was using that evidence to make suggestions of how we should use that information to make outcomes more equal. Because we know that IQ does have, in our system, a direct correlation to positive socioeconomic outcomes. It's unfortunate to admit. So if that is the case, then, and forgive me if I'm wrong about whether this was his argument or not, this is how I understand it, but he's like, if that's the case, we should use that information to create a more equal society. We need garbage men and janitors and, what we might consider lower IQ work just as much, if not more, than bankers and hedge fund managers and people who have very high IQs but contribute little to no real value to the world. So that was my understanding of his argument. He was like, okay, there's
interesting. I'm not familiar with that.
I've come out with these population level differences. Now let's create a system that can account for those differences so that the outcomes of people aren't affected too much in a negative way by this. Because
I think that's such a nuanced, complex topic, though, of our culture, like where we have people brought over as slaves that had nothing to do with their IQ. It's like, so there's a huge amount of historical trauma and abuse, and so it's hard to sort out all the pieces of the puzzle.
Totally. One again, though, there's
also different kinds of intelligence. There's emotional intelligence. There's relational intelligence.
Right.
There's more cognitive, maybe logical intelligence.
Right.
But so it's a complex subject, I think.
Very.
Artistic intelligence or athletic, intelligence.
Yeah.
So.
Totally. I mean,
but I hear what you're
not
saying.
To mention the subject of like savants and people who are very skilled in a particular thing.
Autistic people.
Yeah. Like there's such a spectrum and variety of these things, and it gets back to like sort of hopefully we can come out of this like trying to create a system that can take care of the most vulnerable parts of our population in a compassionate way, and we can see the value of that. Like we might be able to point out our differences and like show how how different we are, but like that's not the truth. We're actually very much the same, and we need to help each other and like support each other and be present for
definitely
for the world.
I mean, the other thing that I was thinking about in terms of the coronavirus is like, why don't we ever talk about what our world population is and like what we would want it to be? Like, I think we could get to a point as a society globally where we could start having global conversations. Like if you had a family and you had like 20 kids, then you might be like, how many more kids do we want to have? You would do that as a family, but why don't we ever do that globally? Like, what is a good number of people? And if we have too many people right now, like how do we transition to a lower number without it impacting our economy really negatively or creating tons of social problems? Or maybe we're at the perfect place right now. How do we stabilize? But I don't think anyone living really thinks there should be more people globally. Anyway.
I agree. And it's it's a tricky one because it plays out in a very microcosmic level in our decisions and on a very macrocosmic level. Previous iterations of humans didn't really have a choice. We actually do now because of contraception.
Yeah, we have a choice.
But
yeah, it's amazing.
Like we
should have we should have a choice
to some degree, yeah. But that's what's tricky about it is like this is I mean, Alan Watts talks about it a lot. He's like, the world is peopling. It's what it does. It's like a tree grows apples.
Yeah,
it's just doing it. It's
I love
not
that.
it's not wrong. It's not right. It's just doing it. And that said, now that we do have the technology that we do, it is a really important consideration to make of like, can I limit myself to having just one child, for example?
Right.
Which would, over time, if everyone made that decision, reduce the population by half over the course of generations.
Yeah, I could stabilize
over and over again, and that's exponential, right?
Right.
And that's not happening, and we're needing to prepare for and cope with the reality that we're facing, which is that population is still growing exponentially. And remember how I was talking about the wolf population growth, rabbit ecological thing? So every single chart that we are aware of in terms of food available in the ecology versus population shows a direct correlation. So that means that if we continue to exponentially increase food production, we're going to continue to exponentially increase population. We're no exception to that law of nature, of ecology.
That's interesting.
But
so you're saying if food production slowed down, our population would just naturally go down.
Yep. And they've actually done studies of mice on this. They've basically like allotted over the course of time. I don't know how quickly mice reproduce and create new generations, but I think it's fairly rapid. Where they give it increased amount of food over time and see how the population is affected, and it's exactly like that.
That's
the population can just go up, and then they kind of keep a steady amount of food, and the population stays steady. And then they give a decreasing amount of food, and the population decreases.
That's fascinating.
Yeah,
it's so simple.
It's a very simple equation.
Back to the earth, back to basics.
Yeah.
Well,
I'm revealing how nerdy I am, but that's from a book called The Story of Bee, which is part of the where I learned of it, which is part of the Ishmael series.
Oh yeah,
Ishmael, The Story of Bee and Why Ishmael. But
there's been other people who've predicted that if we hadn't increased our food production so much, we would have had mass starvation. But what I hear you say more is maybe the population would just naturally go down if there was less food over time.
Yeah.
Like, how do you think about that? Like the availability of food, is that going down because people are starving, or just because we would somehow instinctually choose to have less children if there's less food readily available?
No, it's going down because at least in the population in which that food production takes place, there would be famine and deaths as a result.
So that's not a good outcome.
No. Although my understanding of that research is, I mean, it's tricky at the population level that we're at, but and agriculture basically incentivizes this accumulation of resources, and especially food type of mentality, so that one farmer is incentivized to store enough food for 50 people. And that equation is what results in the exponential growth of population that we're seeing and are in. But yeah, I mean, famines are already happening, and we're exponentially increasing the production of food. So definitely, if we leveled off the production of food, or if we decreased it, that would continue, if not increase. And it's a fear and paranoia of every government around the world. I mean, governments are really afraid of famine because of the unrest that it causes.
Right. No, you're absolutely right. I hope we can find a way to slow it down without famine. Just through our intelligence, we could slow it down.
Yeah. I wonder if I'll be able to find it. There's a really good metaphor for all of this in this book that I'd love to share if I can. But I didn't earmark it, so it might take a minute. Yeah, I mean, and I'm curious what you think, how you I know you've been steeped in Buddhist practice, how you maybe see some of these things. I see some of these things in a lot of the language in Tibetan Buddhism, especially around like samsara and around the experience of suffering as being inherent in this reality.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Like the Buddhist view sounds very pessimistic because it kind of is obsessed with acknowledging suffering. The Buddha was always talking about suffering. There's an interesting story of a kingdom in the Himalayas that became, and this is not the kingdom of Shambhala. It was this little kingdom, and in the legend, everyone in the kingdom became enlightened. And in that legend, the kingdom disappeared. Like, it kind of equated enlightenment with the disappearance of everyone, or the leaving of this plane. And that's always kind of fascinated me because there's this theme running throughout Buddhism that if we were liberated from suffering, we would be like removed in some sense from this world. And a lot of people who talk about Buddhism are very concerned about talking about it in a way where that is addressed by saying that by being fully present in the world, you're already enlightened, and things like that. But there's this other theme running through it as well, of like life is suffering and things are always changing. And it's kind of the opposite of this exponential growth mentality, honestly, that we've been talking about.
Yeah.
Because if you actually believe those teachings fundamentally, you're not motivated to accumulate a lot of money. You're not motivated to try to improve the world materially as much as we are. Like, it's our denial of death that motivates this constant need for self-improvement.
Right.
So, like, a lot of the real meditators, you're not trying to improve yourself at all. You're simply being how you are, as you are. You're letting everything be at peace. Because when you stop making all these waves and rustling the fabric constantly, trying to change things constantly, you let go of control, you let everything be as it is, and then you can realize the nature of things.
Right.
It's like the basic idea in Buddhism.
Well, you're seeing through the illusions that we've created for ourselves,
right?
And
which potentially include everything we've talked about in the last hour. I don't know how long we've been talking. Just ways of playing with illusory reality.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess that's the other not very politically correct fundamental teaching in Buddhism, is that the world as we generally experience it is completely illusory. It's not real at all, not in the slightest. It's like a pretty hardcore teaching.
Yeah.
It's like whatever we're thinking about things, that's not the way they actually are. Things aren't like that. We give things a reality that they don't inherently possess.
Mm-hmm.
Like we were talking about the money, we give it a reality. The piece of paper doesn't have any inherent value. Yeah. Like, what's the difference between the toilet paper we're stockpiling and the dollar bills we're stockpiling?
You can wipe your ass with both, that's for sure. You're rolling in them. It's fascinating. It's one of those elements of Buddhist teaching that it breaks down, and not just Buddhist teaching and philosophical discussion, metaphysics, just breaks down in words, because it's so true, and it's also one of those things that like is experienced rather than able to be communicated well in language. But having a truly, dissolution of self type of mystical experience allows for that direct knowing of that reality, that more transcendent reality, as being truer than this manifest impermanent physical reality.
Right. Yeah, that gets to the heart of the matter too, like the idea of self that we're constructing.
Yeah.
So that's kind of motivating, spinning all the wheels. Yeah. Another word for samsara is the wheels, like the turning. And nirvana is peace. Mm-hmm. So you have like movement, you have peace.
Yeah.
And then we can realize like the non-duality of both, but there's not this sense of trying to improve and get somewhere in the Buddhist tradition.
Yeah.
Like we have. Yeah. But I think there's value in like the Western approach of trying to improve things. Like, it is good to make things better, relatively speaking. It's just not ultimately providing some kind of final solution to our existence the way we want it to.
But what if the most natural, sustainable existence for us was to be hunter-gatherers? Then
I don't know.
everything we do is a distortion of that. Hunter-gatherer
that could be another interpretation of what the Buddha was talking about, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
No, and like, if I may, I'll read you this. It's a really beautiful story, beautiful and scary, and perfect analogy for what's taken place in that transition from hunter-gatherers to agriculture. So this is Chris Ryan, Civilized to Death. Highly recommend it. And it's also somewhat depressing. However, I don't know if depressing is the right word. I think for me, I take comfort in actually having a grounded, clear sense of the situation. You know, so with economics, that's part of my obsession with it. And not to say that I know everything, I definitely don't. But for me, it's helpful, even if it's dark, to know these certain things that are true. Okay, so anyways, a question I'm often asked: if agriculture was so bad, why did they choose it? It's a good question. I wish we could ask Brian Stevenson. One early winter morning in 2003, a group of tourists gathered in the parking lot of the Domaine Chandon Winery in Napa Valley, California. They'd come for a hot air balloon flight over the vineyards. As the balloon was being prepared, a sudden breeze kicked up, and one of the tourists, a young man from Scotland named Brian Stevenson, grabbed the basket, trying to help out. But the balloon broke free and began to lift off. The professionals knew to let go immediately, but Stephen hung on as the balloon ascended to several hundred feet over the parking lot, where his grip finally failed and he fell to his death. We have no idea why he held on, the local sheriff said later. Really? Don't we all know why Brian Stevenson held on? Once his feet were off the ground, he was caught in a loss aversion loop from which the last chance to escape was already gone. The transition from lending a hand to holding on for dear life to the soaring realization that the holding on may have been a fatal mistake probably took no more than a few seconds. But I'd bet that every one of those seconds Stevenson was thinking, I should have let go before. It's too late now. Haven't we all been caught in such traps? Who hasn't been in a situation that seemed to make sense at the time, but that ultimately made no sense at all? Who hasn't been mired in a toxic relationship with someone we love too much to leave right now, tonight? Or stuck in a job that scorches the soul, but that we can't afford to quit, so we buy expensive toys to mask the pain, thereby making the job even harder to quit. Once you get a sense that agriculture was not a boon to our ancestors, it's logical to wonder why they chose to abandon foraging in favor of farming in the first place. But that's just it. Our ancestors didn't choose to abandon foraging in favor of agriculture any more than Brian Stevenson chose to float away from his wife and friends that foggy morning in Napa. In the course of a normal day, we take innumerable forgotten steps through unremarkable doorways. Only in retrospect does it become more clear that one of those unremembered gates was in fact a point of no return. 1 minute you're just hanging out, and next you're barely hanging on.
Wow. That's powerful.
Yeah.
I think we've all been in that predicament. I know I have. Like the abusive relationship, like immediately. That's what came to mind, like before you said that. And, we form strong attachments and bonds, and it's hard to make changes. I think, that's such an interesting thing. Like it's kind of like another way to talk about what I think you're talking about is addiction. Like the ability to not be able to say no is really a sign of addiction.
Yeah. Right. It's the experience is one of compulsion in which the free will is taken out of the equation and is forced to make a decision subconsciously.
But we also inherit this situation from their parents.
That's what's tricky about
once
it.
Once you have a million people that are being fed by agriculture that can't be sustained in the old ways, you don't want to just let them die. Like you wouldn't choose to return. Like you kind of we keep taking these steps that we can't return from. What's
ironic though is death is happening regardless. And that sounds like, maybe a insensitive way to put it, but the amount of devastation and death that's taken place as a result of population expansion and growth over the last several millennia is astounding compared to what our ancestors might have experienced as hunter-gatherers, who, of course, also experienced death. It's not that they were exempt from that. When you apply it to the collective, it gets really tricky because it's like, to what degree am I, as an individual, able to exert my free will over this situation? And
do you think we could choose to go back to being hunter-gatherer people?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Like you personally?
Me personally in my lifetime?
Yeah.
The tricky thing is that now the entire globe has been divvied up. So we would need a pretty massive extinction type event of the human population
to just go back to that lifestyle.
To be able to go back to that, yeah.
Huh.
And the reality is, it's not even hunter-gathering versus agriculture necessarily. There's some more fundamental things, like Native Americans lived sustainably in this part of the world for centuries, millennia, and some of them practiced agriculture, but it was limited.
Right.
It wasn't the majority of their
Interesting.
Their food.
They would manage the forest in certain ways that would like increase the diversity.
Mm-hmm. But the point is, like, it's not agriculture as a fundamental thing. There's more what it is for our civilization. Like, the easiest way to break it down fundamentally, and he talks about this in Ishmael, is like, we're not content with just living the way that we like to live. We have to impose it on others. So the way of domination in agriculture has been,
that became part of their religion.
It wasn't sufficient just to practice that sustainably oneself.
It had to go everywhere.
It had to spread. Yeah,
it is like a virus.
Mm-hmm.
That's how a virus behaves.
Exactly.
We should have greater diversity.
Yeah.
It's amazing that we can't allow indigenous people to just be the way they are. We like just can't stop fucking with them and trying to take away their land. And it's still happening right now in Brazil.
Right.
I read about it often because I actually donated to I should put the link to this. I can't remember the name of it. I think it's called Survivor, but it's a nonprofit set up to aid indigenous peoples, especially tribes that have minimal contact with the outside world. Yeah. It's like a really cool organization that's trying to protect and like ensure the rights of these different people around the world.
Wow.
But a lot of them are in the Amazon.
Yeah.
Like there's still some uncontacted tribes in the Amazon.
Yep.
Which is amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is. And that those are the examples that we have of how our way of life isn't the only way. And that's what's encouraging, is knowing that that's the case. Here in the U.S., I just recently read a book called Empire of the Summer Moon, which is about the Comanche Native Americans in Texas and Oklahoma, and sort of the last century of their existence. They dominated that region for well into the 18th century or 19th century, late 19th century, because of their prowess as hunters and as horsemen, and able to fight the white man well into when they had like automatic rifles and stuff like that. So not automatic, but like multi-shot pistols, and they were still better at defeating the white man well into the 19th century with the bows and arrows and
1800s.
But they were vicious people. So the thing is, like, we shouldn't be under any illusions that like the savages, that we like to think of as hunter-gatherers, weren't in some ways quite wild and quite savage.
Some of them might have, but maybe they had to do that to survive.
Exactly. There's an element of it that's human nature, I think. Sort of that warrior impulse.
It's amazing how little I feel like we really know about America before 1492, whatever it was.
Yeah.
What about the year 1000 or 500?
Yeah.
Back to zero. Like, what was it like?
Yeah. Have you heard of Graham Hancock?
Yeah, a little bit. I know
I have America Before on the shelf there, but I haven't actually gotten very far in it. It's pretty thick, like dense writing and pretty scientific, and but he's a phenomenal author.
I want to learn more about him. Yeah. Well, at least like in terms of like growing up in like the typical school, you never learn anything about that. You learn nothing about it.
No.
It's as if it didn't even exist.
Right. Yeah. I would highly recommend Graham Hancock.
Yeah, I'm going to look into that.
Because he actually talks about a previous advanced civilization that left fingerprints. His main book is called Fingerprints of the Gods, that he wrote in early 90s. But that there was an advanced civilization prior to the Egyptians, prior to the Sumerians, that was wiped off the face of the earth through an extinction event, which is referred to in all of our mythologies as the Great Flood.
The Great Flood.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he has evidence in a later book called Magicians of the Gods about a comet impact on the North American ice sheet that took place about 13,000 years ago, which plunged us out of the Ice Age. And anyway, so his hypothesis is that this advanced civilization existed prior to that extinction event. Some people refer to it as Atlantis, which gets, all of the New Agers excited. And
I think that's 100% possible, is that human beings, we've had the same DNA basically for 125,000 years.
Yeah.
125,000 years.
And that was only that
we
event.
only know 5,000 years of civilization.
That event was only 15,000 years ago,
Right.
13. And so his hypothesis is that this advanced civilization, like we are today, we're very specialized in our skills. So if all goes to shit and the grocery store doesn't have food for us,
And we all die.
then many of us will die because we don't have the skills to survive in nature.
Right.
So the theory that he puts forth is once this cataclysmic event took place and
Everything just collapsed.
And wiped out the advanced civilization, those of them who survived would have collaborated with hunter-gatherers to survive, to learn how to be back in nature, living off the land, not as this advanced civilization, and that those ancient ancestors were the ones that propagated and taught future civilizations things like building the pyramids and the sort of architecture that exists in Mesoamerica, like with the Mayans and the Aztecs. It's pretty far out theory, one that can't be proven, but he has very interesting evidence that it's quite compelling to support this theory. And it's a really trippy one. It has to do with the precession of the equinoxes and how. Are you familiar with this concept? It's really fascinating. Sorry, I'm going on a rant here, but this is okay. I love Graham Hancock. He's fascinating.
Progression of the equinoxes?
So precession. Yeah. So you're familiar with how in astrology, as we go through the year, the sun rises in a particular astrological zodiac sign, like Pisces or Aquarius. And that goes, Aquarius, Pisces. I'm not very familiar with astrology, but it goes in this sequence in that direction.
Yeah.
What the precession of the equinoxes is it goes backwards, and the cycle takes about 23,000 years, which is the equinoxes, so the spring and fall equinoxes. I don't know which star or the sun potentially rises in a particular house. So in Pisces or Aquarius. And this is where we come up with the idea of the age of Aquarius. So we previously were in the age of Pisces, and then now we're transitioning into the age of Aquarius. And this is an age that takes about 23,000 years to progress. And it's a very difficult thing to observe astronomically because it takes so fucking long. Like we only shift on that equinox precession, like 1 degree every 1,000 years or so. So it's really difficult to observe astronomically. It has to do with how the Earth tilts on its axis over time. There's wobble in how the axis of the Earth tilts over time. But so anyways, his evidence for these ancient civilizations being the ones responsible for things like the pyramids has to do with, for example, the Sphinx being like a lion, Leo symbol, and that the age of Leo was like 30,000 years ago.
Oh, wow.
So, and he has many more examples of that. But
astrology is
and they baked in that precession of the equinoxes, the math and astronomy involved in that is baked into sacred sites all over the world. Yeah,
it's amazing.
This is like a very long-winded recommendation of Graham Hancock. This is basically the concept of fingerprints of the gods, and it's
nice.
It's fascinating. Yeah.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. How you feeling?
Feeling good.
Yeah.
Any last words?
No, thanks for doing this, Julian. I think I'm really inspired by your fervor in hosting A State of Mind, and appreciate your friendship, and really love just being able to rant. For
Yeah.
how long would we go? That was an hour and 40 minutes, dude.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is a long one.
Yeah. Thanks everyone for tuning in. Really,
Yeah.
really blessed to be able to share in this way. And, for all that I'm poo-pooing on civilization, I do really like technology.
Hopefully it will continue.
Maybe we can find a nice balance of, iPhones and foraging.
Yeah.
That works for everyone.
I think podcasts, like both creating them, but also listening to them is so amazing right now because it's a deeper connection with people.
Yeah.
It's a longer amount of time to really delve into things in greater detail.
Yeah.
It's cool that we've had time to do it. So.
Yeah. You get to learn how nerdy I am.
Yeah.
Read too many books. No, thank you so much, Julian. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for listening. In the background, you can hear Stephen and in a moment me playing guitar together. And if you enjoyed this podcast, please consider taking a moment to donate even $1 or $2, patreon.com/A State of Mind. Learn more info about each episode, astateofmindplay.com, and learn more about my work as a therapist and meditation teacher at julianocean.us. Enjoy the guitar, and I will see you here next time.